A Boeing 747 with 524 people on board. At 24,000 feet, suddenly the tail of the aircraft separates mid-air. The flight crew had no controls left and no direction. Inside the cabin, there was no oxygen and no air pressure. But even then, how did they manage to keep the plane in the air for the next 45 minutes? This is a story of human courage, engineering failure, and a flight with no kind of control left. And that flight was Japan Air 123. Welcome once again to iFlare Videos. Viewers, on August 12, 1985, a Japan Airlines Boeing 747 stood at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, offboarding passengers. Exactly 1 hour later, it was scheduled to take off again for Osaka. Every day, thousands travel from Tokyo to Osaka. But today was extra busy because during Japan's Obon holiday season, people were heading to their hometowns. After cleaning, Japan Air 123 boarded 509 passengers and 15 crew members. For the crew, this was just another routine flight. But passengers had no idea that the aircraft they were about to board was carrying a weakness that had existed for years. A fatal flaw unknown to the pilots and even to the flight engineer. Because of the busy schedule, this special Boeing 747 was about to perform its sixth flight of the day. The cockpit crew. Captain Masami Takahama, 49 years old, leading the flight with over 12,000 hours of experience. First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, 39 years old, who was already in the process of being promoted to captain, and this very flight was the most important for his promotion. He had 3,900 hours of experience. The third member, Flight Engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, 46 years old, responsible for monitoring the technical systems from behind the pilot seats. Looking at the cockpit crew's capability, one could easily say the 509 passengers were in safe hands. But was the aircraft itself equally capable? That would soon be revealed. At 6:04 p.m., the doors of Japan Air 123 closed. The pilots taxied the plane to runway 15L. Tokyo to Osaka was a very short flight, just 1 hour and 12 minutes, which meant by the time it reached cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, preparations would already begin for descent. Tokyo weather was clear, but several thunderstorms were forming across Japan. So the pilots were instructed not to fly directly to Osaka, but instead to take a route over the ocean. At 6:12 p.m., with clearance from the control tower, the thrust levers went forward and the plane successfully took off. So far, everything was absolutely normal. But just 12 minutes after takeoff, over Sagami Bay, a mysterious sound was heard inside the aircraft. And along with it, a rupture opened in the tail section. The passengers, moments ago excited to head home, saw their excitement instantly turn into fear. Because of the rupture, the cabin filled with noise, and loose objects were pulled violently towards the hole. It all happened so quickly that no one could even understand what had just occurred. The noise was so loud that it was also recorded in the cockpit voice recorder. At this point, it is important to know, as a plane climbs to higher altitude, outside air becomes thinner and oxygen levels drop. To counter this, artificial pressure is maintained inside the cabin, equal to atmospheric pressure near sea level. This means at 24,000 feet, outside pressure is low, but cabin pressure is high. That higher pressure constantly pushes outward on the cabin walls. The cabin is kept fully airtight so that no pressure leaks. But if even a small part of the cabin is weak, air pressure can rip it open, creating a rupture. As a result, cabin pressure collapses, oxygen levels drop, and passengers can fall ill or struggle to breathe. This was exactly what happened in Japan Air 123. But the pilots still did not realize the actual cause. On the cockpit voice recorder, they speculated it might be the landing gear doors or maybe a sound from the engines. The truth was the entire rear fuselage section had broken away, taking the rudder with it. With the tail ruptured, cabin pressure could no longer be maintained. But even more dangerous, without the rudder, the aircraft was about to slip completely out of pilot control. The rudder controls yaw, the left-right direction of the nose. For turns, roll movement is used. For nose-up and nose-down pitch, and yaw keeps the aircraft aligned. In simple words, at 24,000 feet, without a rudder, Japan Air 123 could neither turn properly nor align with the runway for landing. And the pilots had no idea the rudder was gone. The aircraft became unstable, rocking left and right. Even autopilot could not control it. On the ground, someone noticed the abnormal movement, took a photo, and in it the missing rudder was clearly visible. Still unaware, the pilots continued, while the cabin crew made announcements instructing passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The captain, sensing danger, immediately set the transponder to frequency 7,700, the universal distress signal. Now every control tower knew Japan Air 123 was in an emergency situation. The captain decided to return to Tokyo. He informed the tower and requested clearance to land back. Permission was granted, make a 90 degrees turn and return. The first officer at the controls banked the plane right at a 40 degrees angle. But the aircraft's bank angle quickly went far beyond 40 degrees. The captain shouted, "Reduce the bank angle." But no matter what, the angle wouldn't reduce. The plane wasn't responding to control inputs. Then, the flight engineer reported, the hydraulic pressure was dropping fast. Within seconds, hydraulics reached zero. That was the moment all three cockpit crew realized. The plane was completely out of their control. For those who don't know, every control surface, the ailerons for roll, elevators for pitch, flaps for reducing speed, all move with the help of hydraulic pressure. At flight speeds of 1,000 kilometers per hour, it's impossible to move them by hand. Only hydraulics make it possible. But the ruptured tail had also torn through hydraulic lines. Now, with hydraulics gone, the cockpit controls were nothing but useless levers. At 24,000 feet, Japan Air 123 was crippled. Cabin pressure gone. Oxygen masks dropped. Hydraulics gone. And now, passengers and crew began suffering hypoxia. Hypoxia is when low oxygen in the body causes confusion, poor decision-making, slowed movements, and even unconsciousness. Cabin crew announced, "Put on your oxygen masks." Meanwhile, the pilots had only one set of controls left, the engines. The captain used engine thrust alone to try to stabilize the rolling aircraft. To turn right, increase power on the left engines. To turn left, increase power on the right engines. When banking too far, momentarily increasing power on one side could bring the plane back. Using this method, they managed to regain partial control. Their mission now, bring the plane back to Tokyo as quickly as possible. But first, they needed to descend closer to the ground so cabin pressure could stabilize. Normally, elevators would lower the plane, but hydraulics were gone. The captain suggested lowering the landing gear to create drag and reduce speed. Landing gear also use hydraulics, but this time, gravity managed to drop them into position. By 6:45 p.m., Japan Air 123 circled above the city of Otsuki, descending from 24,000 to 13,500 feet. Cabin pressure and oxygen levels improved, a major victory. But the danger was not over. The plane still needed to turn right towards Tokyo. But making precise turns with only engine thrust was nearly impossible. Too much thrust would push the nose up, slowing the plane dangerously. At low speeds, it risked stalling. Unintentionally, the plane drifted into Japan's mountainous region. At 6:48 p.m., the captain shouted to the first officer, "Turn right, mountains ahead." But with only engines, such a sharp turn was impossible. Alarms filled the cockpit. The aircraft, unable to escape, descended over mountains at just 6,800 feet. By 6:54 p.m., the captain's panic was clear in his voice recordings. And then, just minutes later, tragic sounds marked the end. Japan Air 123 struck a mountain during a turn at low altitude. Out of 524 on board, only 4 survived, seated near the center on the left side of the cabin. All others perished in the disaster. Investigations revealed, 7 years earlier, this same aircraft's tail had struck the runway during landing. It was grounded for weeks of repairs. Boeing technicians worked on the tail, but installed the splice plate incorrectly. Calculations showed the faulty repair could withstand only 11,000 pressurization cycles. But Japan Air 123 had already flown 12,500 cycles in that condition. And on this tragic day, the pressure finally gave way. After the crash, investigators tested 4 different pilots in simulators, recreating the exact scenario. All 4 crashed. None could keep the plane airborne as long as the real Japan Air 123 crew had.